Hello dear friends, my name is Jitendra Bafna. I am a senior MuleSoft architect. In this video, we will going to explore what is Anypoint Data Graph. So basically MuleSoft has recently announced a new or cool feature that is known as Anypoint Data Graph. So Anypoint Data Graph works on GraphQL basically. A GraphQL is nothing, it's a graph query language. So we will understand what is a GraphQL. So basically a GraphQL is basically open source query language for your REST APIs. So basically like you can hit a query to the REST API for fetching the data, and it is initially developed by a Facebook in 2012 before releasing publicly in 2015. So GraphQL allow you to send the query to API and get the required data. So basically it is possible to query your REST API using GraphQL and get the required data. Okay, and as you are aware, like REST APIs are powerful and follow a resource oriented and the well structured approach. So but however, whenever the data is complex, it is not possible to fetch all the data within the single request, as it involves various operation and routes get more complex. So basically what happened, like if you want to fetch a complex data, like if you want to fetch the data from multiple tables or multiple backend systems, in that case, like you have to use n number of operation, or you have to use the multiple operation to fetch all the data. But GraphQL is very useful in such cases, okay, and structure the data in the form of graph with this pure powerful query syntax for traversing, retrieving and modifying the data. So GraphQL is basically capable of fetching the complex data using a single request. So you can query a multiple REST API into the single request and fetch the data from multiple REST API. So we will going to explore various use cases where we can make use of this GraphQL. Also, GraphQL is capable of aggregating the data and return a predictable data to the client basically. Okay, so let me introduce Anypoint DataGraph. So Anypoint DataGraph was a tool recently launched by a MuleSoft as a part of Anypoint platform. So basically it is capable of performing a GraphQL queries. Okay, so with Anypoint DataGraph you can reuse a multiple API in a single request, as I mentioned previously. Basically you can call a multiple APIs within the single request and you can aggregate the data and send back to the client. Okay, so one of the best thing about the Anypoint data graph is that like you don't have to write a single line of the code. You can do configuration and you can call the multiple underlying API and you can just aggregate the data and return back to the client basically. Okay, the enterprise architect can easily unify API into one data service, all without writing a more code. A developer can consume multiple API from the data service in the single GraphQL request. As I mentioned, we will going to see what does this mean in upcoming slide. Okay, so there are few steps which need to be performed. Like you have to create a unified schema of your API to democratize the data access across your org. Then you can run a data graph as a SaaS application to reduce the overhead and the maintenance. So basically data graph is the managed service, so you don't have to worry about the underlying platform performance and all those things. This has been automatically taken care by MuleSoft because it's a managed service, right? And you can use this as a SaaS application, so you are not worried about any underlying infrastructure or any cores or any like about CPU uses and the memory uses, right? Then you can consume and reuse multiple APIs in a single GraphQL request to innovate faster. There are other features or other capabilities of Anypoint Data Graph. You can dynamically query data from unified schema. So we will see how we can query the data. First, we will see how we can create a unified schema and then how we can query it. Okay. Then also we will see how we can access Anypoint Data Graph from public internet using shared load balancer. Then explore your application network from single UI, and you can discover, reuse and serve information from application network without writing a new code. Okay, so but always, like as you are aware, like everything is come up with every component having some restriction and limitation. So as Anypoint Data Graph has also have some limitation. So Anypoint DataGraph support REST API with RAML and Open API specification, and it only supports for GET method. What mentioned? So Anypoint DataGraph only support the REST API which is designed using RAML and Open API specification. It only supports for the GET method. The GraphQL is not supported for post, put, patch or delete method. So underlying API must be on GET basically. If GraphQL has to send the request to underlying API, it can send on the GET HTTP verbs. Okay. So as I mentioned, it currently doesn't support post, put, patch or delete. Maybe in future it may support. Anypoint DataGraph restrict downstream REST API calls to, so basically when Anypoint DataGraph will call a downstream API basically to fetch the data, right? So maximum, like, there can be 150 concurrent or ongoing call per unified schema. So you can have a parallel around 150 calls per unified schema. The timeout is around 5 seconds per call. So you have to ensure that like your underlying API or your downstream API respond within the 5 seconds, otherwise the request will time out. Then the maximum of 5 MB of response data per call. So basically when you are sending the request to underlying API or downstream API, the response should not be exceeded 5 MB. Okay. So Anypoint DataGraph limits the query service too. So basically 30 seconds timeout per query. So there is a 30-second timeout for the per query basically. Okay. And maximum you can you can fetch 100 fields per query. So it should not exceed 100 fields per query. So in this case we have a 5 fields, 1 2 3 4 5. So like that you can have up to 100 fields, not more than 100 fields. Then you have some restriction like the graph query maximum depth maximum depth of 100 fields per query, which we have discussed, right? So for example, the query has a depth of 6. So currently 1 2 3 4 5 6 6, so basically it can have a maximum depth of 100 fields, not more than that. So depth is count as a one curly bracket as a one depth. You can see that 2 3 4, then it come as a 5 6, the amount come as a 6. Then amount is the name and the currency is the child for amount, so it depth is 6 only. So that is how like you can up to your query can have to depth of 100. Then Anypoint DataGraph supports up to 16,000 fields per unified schema. So basically you can have up to 16,000 fields per unified schema. Okay, so we will going to discuss some of the use cases. So basically, like I have some underlying API, like I am fetching some account details from the underlying API. So but generally what we do, like the mobile application require 2 fields, and whereas the web application require 8 fields. So generally we create a multiple API at the experience layer. One is for mobile API and for mobile application, one is for web application. So for mobile application, like from account I just want you can mention I just want ID, first name, last name in the mobile. But for web application I required ID, first name, last name, mobile, email address and the postal code. So this can be easily done by a Anypoint DataGraph basically. Like you don't have to create extra layer of experience layer for mobile app and your web application. You can create you can create a unified schema, and you can send the query, and query you can say like I want this field. So that query will call the underlying API will send the response, and like the Anypoint DataGraph will ensure that it just send a 2 fields only. So those kind of things can be taken care. So the second use case, as I mentioned, like you can call the multiple APIs within the single request. So I want accounts, balance and the transaction data. So basically you can use the Anypoint DataGraph, where the client will send the request to Anypoint DataGraph unified schema, and the request will go to account, balance and transaction, right? And the response will get aggregated and sent back to the client. So these are the 2 use cases. You can see that. So this is the final output which contain accounts, balances and the transactions. So those kind of things you can do with So basically here you are covering, like you are sending a single request to call the multiple APIs, whereas also it performing the aggregation of the data. We will see that. Okay. So let me do one thing. Let me go to my API management, and in my API manager, in my design, I will go to my design center. Okay, so basically I have open banking APIs where like I have a 5 endpoints, accounts, and like fetch the single account, fetch the multiple accounts, like fetch the transaction, fetch the balances, and the fetch the single transaction. So this is the my API. Let's wait while the design center is opening. So you can see like I have a 5 endpoints like /account/account/account ID. All these are get methods. So I have total 5 methods or 5 endpoints in my open banking APIs. So you can see that, and like I have defined the data type for each. For account, I have this particular fields, like I have this property: first name, last name, address, phone, website, company. I have a balance data type. I have a transaction data type. So I've defined the data type, and like I've just used the type in my YAML to tell this is the data type I need to use for this particular endpoints basically. Okay, so I have defined that. So now apart from that, I have also exposed or published this API on my API manager with by enabling the API auto discovery. So basically here I'm using the API auto discovery endpoint, like without proxy basically. So this is my API has been published to, you can see this API is active. I haven't applied any policies on that. This is a simple API. So okay, and also I have deployed my application in runtime manager. Okay, so let's I'm waiting so for my application to open. So this is my application, open banking app. Then like I will try to open I will try to test this application. So this is open banking app. I will copy this URL. I will go to my Postman, and I can say http API, then /accounts. Okay, then I can say customer ID, which is equals to something like this. Okay, so this is my URL for underlying API. I will send the request. Okay, this is get, I'm sorry. Okay, so I will send the request and then I will get a response. Okay, but the problem is that like I am getting this particular response, but my problem statement is that like for mobile I just want ID, first name, address, and the phone. But for for web application I require like 2 extra field, company and account type. So how can we achieve that? So generally we create a different layer or experience layer or presentation layer where we keep like a separate mobile API and we keep the separate web APIs basically to serve our current problem statement, right? But there is other way. Recently MuleSoft has come up with a feature called Anypoint DataGraph. So if you see, so there is a new component available in your Anypoint platform, that is DataGraph. You can simply click on DataGraph and we will see how we will going to create a unified schema. Okay, so for that you like your API, like you must have a YAML, as published to Anypoint Exchange, and it will be good like if you have published the API to API manager and you deployed the application. The first thing, you can start building your unified schema. I can say add API. So it will going to search like your API which is published to Exchange. So I can say open banking API. The next thing you have to just say next configure URL. So here it will say, yeah, so this is the latest version is 1.0.03 and API version is version 1. I can say confirm selection. Everything looks good. Now you have to provide the URL. So basically there is a two option. There are two options: get an existing URL for Anypoint platform or add new URL. So I will use the get existing URL from Anypoint platform because my implementation is already deployed to runtime manager. So I will copy the URL. So this is, I think this is my, I will not copy full URL. I will just copy a base URL. Basically you don't have to copy complete URL. You can simply say edit URL, Control V. This is my URL. Okay, I will say save. Okay, now you can say provide authentication. If you have any authentication enabled for your downstream or underlying API, you can select. Currently it supports basic authentication, client ID enforcement via query, and there can be custom authentication. Okay, so currently I am using no authentication. I will just say no auth, then simply say preview schema. Okay, so guys, you can see this is a preview schema. Basically, let me reduce the size to 100. So here you can see all the method has been listed: accounts, account balance by account ID, accounts by account ID, account transactions by account ID, account transaction by account. These are all the 5 method which is available into my YAML. Basically, you can see that, and these are the data type. It will list down all the data types where like I have field name like account type, address. So for balance, what are the different data type? So these are the things. Just if everything is fine, so you can say next, edit scheme. Okay, if you want like some methods needs to be hidden, you can simply click I don't want to add this particular method in the unified schema. You can just hide it, otherwise you can make this as a visible. Okay, so I will keep everything as a visible for now, and I can say add to unified schema. So generally it will take at least it say this may take up to 15 minutes, but generally it doesn't take that much of the time. It will happen in 1 or 2 minutes. Till that, I will pause my video. Hello guys, welcome back. If you see, my unified schema has been deployed successfully. You can see the status is up to date. Here also you can see what are the list of APIs you have published in as a part of Anypoint DataGraph, and like so this is just an overview. So I will say go to unified schema, and here I will say run query. Okay, then you can create a new application, or like what if you have any application already created, you can say that, and I will say request access. Okay, so let's wait. Now my graph query console has been opened. So now I can start querying. I want to fetch the accounts. Okay, so in account I have to pass a customer ID, because if you see for my underlying API, the customer ID is a query parameter, and I can say 2345. Okay, so then I can put a curly bracket, then I can say first name. I want the first name. So basically here I'm saying from account I want first name, I want ID, I want last name. Okay, so these are the 3 fields I require it. So I simply say run. So I got 3 fields, like first name, ID, and last name. If you see in previous response, we got all the fields, but in this case I got only the required field, or only the fields which I have sent into my query. Okay, apart from that, if I want address, I can put address also. It will give address. Then I put a website. I can say run. So I got the website also. That is how you can pass into the query. Now I want to call a multiple APIs. So here what I can do. So I want to call a balance also. So I can say accounts by balance. Okay, and I can, for balance, the account ID is URI parameters. I will just pass a account, whatever account number. Then within that any fields, like I just want a balance type, and I want amount. Then I can simply say run. So I got the balance also. You can see in this case what will happen, it will call this accounts endpoint as well as the balance endpoint. like I have a balance account ID, something like this, and I have a balances endpoint. Okay, I will send the request. So if you see in my balances, I have this two data. This is array of balances. So I got this response back. But here if you see, I don't like this name, you know, I want some proper name. So you can add the alias balances like this. Okay, so now if I run the query, I will get the balances. Now I also want a transactions. Okay, so I can put the control space, and I can say transactions by account ID. Here I can pass account ID, which is 11232. Okay, and in transaction I just want transaction ID, and I want amount, and I want currency. So these are the fields we require. Okay, I just run it. So I got a transactions also, but transactions, like the naming doesn't look user friendly. I can put a transactions ls, I can say run. Okay, now I got the transaction also. Okay, so now your question must, like, we have tested from this particular graph query console. Is there any way like we can test it from, you know, Postman, or if I want to do testing from outside? So this is the URL. You can simply, you know, click on this copy endpoint, and this is the URL. You have to copy it. Okay, you have to go to Anypoint Platform. For that you will use the post method. See, like for underlying it doesn't support post, but when you are hitting the GraphQL API, you have to pass the post method. That is fine. Then you have to copy a client ID and pass this as a header parameter. I can say client ID tab. Then I can say client secret. Okay, and copy this client. You can say so, and just say copy, and you can paste it here. Now here, if you go into body, you can simply say GraphQL and copy that query which we have written on the console, GraphQL console. Okay, now send the request. So you got the response back here also. Like we got a balances, we got accounts, we got a transactions, like, you know. So what we have seen, two use cases, how we can just restrict the number of fields in the response, and the second, how we can call a multiple API within the single request, and like how Anypoint DataGraph can aggregate the response and send back to you. So these are the some cool features provided by Anypoint DataGraph. We will see some more use cases, some more complex use cases, like with some, like if some API have some primary key or foreign key relation, those kind in upcoming video. I hope you like the video. If you like the video, please click on like and subscribe button. Thanks for watching.